Tonight's reading comes from Luke 19, verse 28 to the end. After Jesus had said this, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. As he approached Bethphage and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' say, 'The Lord needs it.'" Those who were sent ahead went and found it just as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, "Why are you untying the colt?" They replied, "The Lord needs it." They brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. As he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. When he came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." When Jesus entered the temple courts, he began to drive out those who were selling. "It is written," he said to them, "My house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." Every day he was teaching at the temple, but the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the leaders among the people were trying to kill him. Yet they could not find any way to do it, because all the people hung on his words.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Iona. Iona had about 20 seconds notice about doing that reading. Can I just do this? I just want to take a photo, actually. All right, let's do it. We take 400, average, around the world, adults take 450 selfies a year. We're fairly obsessed with these things, aren't we? 93 million a day. Average person, 7 minutes a day taking selfies. Not just taking photos, taking selfies. So, my mum hasn't ever taken one. I've taken two because I took one this morning and one this evening. So that's lots of balancing out there, isn't it? What are we doing? Why do we do it? What is this thing we're doing when we capture ourselves on a photograph? Of course, we're doing lots of things. But at obvious level, we're kind of recording our involvement in something. See, we were there. We were in on it. We are the kind of people who hang around the Mona Lisa. This is us. This is the kind of thing that we do. Palm Sunday, today, marks the beginning of the most important week in the Christian year, Holy Week. The Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, give a huge amount of their gospel to this last week. Matthew, Mark, and Luke about a third, John nearly a half, to these final 5 days plus Resurrection Sunday. Every detail in these days is significant. But if we'd been there, right, if we'd have been present in that last week, what would we have seen? What would we have taken photographs of? Of course, we'd have taken photographs of Jesus riding in on a donkey. Jesus isn't doing this because his feet are hurting or he's a bit tired that morning. He's not doing it just because he wants to show how gentle he is, and that messianic pretender Judas Maccabees 150 years before came riding into Jerusalem on a war horse. He's not just doing that. What does Jesus think he's doing? As a child, I used to really love when my parents' friends and their families would come to our house and we'd play games together. And particularly, I used to love the games that had a kind of secret code to it. We used to play this one, like, let's imagine the room full of like 25, 30 people. It was a bit tight. And we played this game, like someone would pass a pair of scissors to the person next door to them and say, these scissors are crossed. And the next person would pass it and go, these scissors are uncrossed. And you'd look at the scissors and they'd hold them in a certain way, and it was completely baffling, but there was a code to it, which was if you had your legs crossed, when you passed them, they were crossed, and if they weren't, they were uncrossed. There was another game we played with a cushion, and like you said, the moon has got 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. And if you coughed before, you got it right, and if you didn't, you lost. But it was that thing that like there was a code to it. And if you knew the code, and the best thing about it was that the really clever people could never get the code. And they'd sit there going, I can't believe I can't get it. And like the best was like 25 people knew what the code was, and they'd cracked it, and the one person was like, oh, I can't believe it. Jesus is doing something that's like code. In a way that like burning material is one thing, but if you burn the material that's a flag, it's a whole different thing. This is a really significant code action that Jesus is doing, because everybody knows the code. Everybody's in on it. The code is Zechariah 9. Behold, Jerusalem, your king comes to you, humble and riding on a donkey. That's why Jesus is on this beast of burden. Not because his feet are hurting, not because it's the quickest way into Jerusalem, but because he wants everybody to know that by doing this, he is king. So as he rides up the Kidron Valley, as he goes over the Mount of Olives, as he comes down into Jerusalem, he's not saying a word, but his actions of being on this donkey are saying everything. Here is the king, much more powerfully than any words. This is his claim to be king. But what a king he is. He is a king on a donkey, and he is humble, but he's also a king who, throughout the week, things will be done to him which are almost the opposite of what happens to a king. So he gets given a staff of power, but it's a reed. He gets given a robe, a royal robe, but it's just a piece of scarlet material they found. And he gets crowned, but with thorns rammed on his head. He will be enthroned, but it's not on a golden throne, it's on a cross. Jesus the King. Jesus not standing for election. Jesus not canvassing for the votes of Jerusalem here, but making a categorical statement. The King of the whole world. What a different king he is. Ruling with such power, but that power is love rather than force, never violence. And as he rides into Jerusalem, if we were there with our phones, we would be taking photograph after photograph after photograph because we're here. This is it. This is the moment that we have been longing for. Generations have been longing for this, and it's happening in our time. The time is now. Here he is. They are ecstatic. And as he rides, and everybody is full of joy that they're kind of pulling branches off trees and laying their coats as a red carpet before the king. What's Jesus doing? Well, if you could take a picture of his face, you'd be dismayed because he's crying. As he approached Jerusalem, he saw the city. He wept over it the crying king, the weeping Messiah. Those around Jesus have got used to him recently shedding tears. Remember when he was at his friend's grave, Lazarus' grave, and we learned twice that he weeps. And one of the girls once came home with some RE homework to do. It was a sheet where they had to fill in on one side. It was about Jesus and both his divinity, his being God and his being human. And they had to fill in the bits that showed in Jesus' life that he was divine and the things that showed that he was human. And the teacher had started this off. And so in the divine section, they were like, oh, he performs miracles, like feeds 5,000. And in the this proves he's human, it was that he cries. It's a hard thing to be one of my children when you have your RE homework. But I'm like, no, absolutely not. His tears don't just show his humanity. His tears are his divinity. He weeps over the state of what he sees. He is God incarnate, weeping over this city, weeping over Jerusalem still. The tears of Jesus. I love this next picture. The tears of Jesus. Almost, this picture kind of conveys something like it's too much. This emotion, this sorrow of what he sees going on. The tears of Jerusalem, over London, over who we are. Do we recognize this one who brings peace? What does he think he's doing? Oh, he's entering the brokenness of the world, and it breaks him. And so today, Jesus weeping over Jerusalem, but weeping over Rafah in Gaza. This was 1 week, this was 3 weeks later. Jesus then goes to the temple, all on the same day. Jesus goes to the temple, the place that is called in the Psalms the joy of the whole earth, the meeting place between God and humanity. And his actions here in the temple are going to be the thing that when he's on trial will be brought up as evidence that convicts him for execution. What does he think he's doing? He clears the temple. In some, he throws the tables over. In John, he makes a whip of cords to drive out the money changers. I don't think it's a mild protest at the price of bookmarks in the shop. I think it's an act of judgment. It's an act of judgment against the temple. This is why it is so controversial. The temple is God's dwelling place. It's where you went for sacrifice, and you needed to sacrifice in order to know that you'd been forgiven. It's where you made your peace with God. It's where you got declared to be clean. It's where you praised God. It's where you met with God. Jesus has walked around the streets. He's declared people clean on the streets. He said to them that when you meet him, you meet God. He's declared that people's sins are forgiven, and he will give himself in sacrifice. And as he does, the curtain in the temple is ripped in two. Jesus is taking the role of the temple from it. And that is the judgment of God against his people. And Jesus is taking this. It all happens in him. And if we had a camera, we could capture all these things going on. This riding in on a donkey, this cheering crowd, this weeping Messiah, and this absolute pandemonium in the temple. And all these actions don't just happen to him. All these actions are his choice. This is what he chooses to do. In Luke, he's set his face to Jerusalem at the end of chapter 10. He has been resolutely going in this direction for weeks. These choices he makes are remarkable. He does this astonishingly. He makes these choices alone. He goes to the Gethsemane, the Garden of Gethsemane, the Mount of Olives. He goes there even though he knows that if he goes there, he's going to be killed. He doesn't run in the opposite direction. He goes knowing that he's going there will mean absolutely, definitely that he will die within 24 hours. And yet, as he freely makes these decisions, he makes them remarkably. He doesn't make them with resentment. He doesn't want revenge on the people who are bad to him. He pleads for their forgiveness. And again, these aren't just the actions of a good man. But the New Testament insists that Jesus is God amongst us. So the actions of Jesus are the actions of God. The choices of Jesus are the choices of God. Divine choices, to be this kind of king, to care this much, to pronounce and bear judgment. What do we see? We see more than we can ever comprehend. I love this picture of Jesus over Rio, struck by lightning, because I think this is the kind of a picture of everything that is happening this week, that Jesus is absorbing every single thing that is wrong in the world, all our bad choices, all of our sin, all evil on Jesus, because he chooses to be the Savior of the world. Jesus isn't the only person that we would take pictures of, though, if we were there. We'd be taking pictures of ourselves. And what would we see of ourselves? We'd see ourselves delighted that Jesus is coming. We'd see ourselves praising God that this moment is happening and we are part of it. The trouble is, of course, that the people who are delighted to be part of it and who are singing Hosanna and ripping the palm branches off are the people who 5 days later change their tune. That their Hosanna becomes crucify him. What do they think they're doing? Why so fickle? Why so changeable? Well, maybe Jesus just hasn't fulfilled their hopes and their desires. And us? Will we sing our songs of worship while the adrenaline's high? While Jesus has fulfilled our desires and our hopes, as long as everybody else is. And then what do we see when we see his face crying? Are our hearts moved by the state of the world? And when they are, do we recognize them? Maybe our tears over the state of the world are evidence that we're made in God's image. And yet, what are the times that we kind of remove ourselves from the pain of it all? That we've chosen comfort over engaging truly with the sorrow. And then, do we let Jesus turn our tables over? Or does he just come to endorse what we're doing? Especially if we do things in his name in holy places. Do we recognize how easy it is to make this faith serve us and our ways? I tell you, I've been really quite appalled by how much time in my prayers I spend praying for myself. Like, as if faith and prayer were primarily for me. And this week, this Holy Week, I think we're invited, maybe even compelled, maybe even challenged to follow Jesus, to see what we see about Jesus and to see what we see about ourselves, to follow him to his grave, and to see ourselves in these pictures, to consider that it wasn't just Judas who betrays him. I betray him for the right price. Peter's denial, again, it's the price for Peter of saving his own reputation. My denials? Pilate's hand-washing when taking responsibility and doing the right thing is just too costly. And then, the story reaches its climax, and there are very few people even around then. At the crucifixion, nearly everybody has left. Everyone, of course, again, except the women. The women are the ones who are the most loyal. But where's everyone gone? Well, is it not just the cruelty and the savagery and the just absolute horrendousness of watching someone die, but also the fact that what do we see about ourselves in this? It's more than we can face. Because what we see in Jesus, what I see in Jesus, I kind of see the opposite in me. The kind of king he is, the way he exercises power, the softness of his heart, the strength of his companion, taking responsibility and taking judgment, choosing to face the hardest path for the sake of his relentless, unbreakable love. In him, in Jesus, we see somebody who doesn't put himself in the center of his photographs or his life. Our culture, we're obsessed with ourselves. Maybe that's the other thing that selfies are about. Yeah, we want to show that we were there and participants, but also this is about us being at the center of it all. Apple know exactly what they were doing with their iPhone and iPad and iMessage, because we all put I at the center of everything. You do you. And the damage this does. And yet Jesus just doesn't do that. He doesn't put himself at the center of everything. So his choices like aren't resentful choices. I think he is given, he could die resentful. He could die angry and bitter and unforgiving. But he chooses to die with a loving heart. In the darkness, will he let go of the light? No, he will not let go of the light. He gives himself without resentment. But the reason I'm drawn to him isn't because I'm like him. It's because he's so different than me. He acts so differently than I find myself acting. And that's exactly why he does it. He does it because I can't save myself. I can't help myself. I'm curved in on myself. I'm obsessed with myself. And the thing I can't do anything about, ultimately, he comes to do something about. The one who doesn't have this selfishness in him comes and takes my place. And so, as we follow him to his grave, we realize not only are all these choices for us, to be with us, to be in the pain and sorrow of the world, but the grave that is actually laid in, like it's not even his. It's Joseph of Arimathea's grave. Of course Jesus doesn't have a grave, because he's laid in my grave. That's my grave he's in. That's my death. His suffering is our suffering. His judgment that he bears is the judgment that we should bear. The separation that he experiences is the separation that is rightfully mine. And yet he chooses. He chooses for it so it doesn't come to me. And he comes to us today. This Jesus who is carried in on this donkey comes to us not in a donkey. This morning the donkey wouldn't move from the back there. Wouldn't come in. Martin tried everything to get the donkey up here. It did give a good bray though at the back. But Jesus comes in. If Jesus can come in on a donkey, he can come in anyway to us. Jesus comes to us. He comes to me and to you. There's no question of Jesus refusing to come to you tonight. Your mistakes are problems. The things that we feel we've done wrong that would probably, surely stop Jesus coming. No, none of that stops him. So even though I've talked about us seeing ourselves in these pictures, us seeing him in them, and us seeing ourselves in them, the fact is that we're already in there because he's taken us there. We're already in these pictures, but this week, let's get in on it again. Let's see ourselves in it again. Let's stitch ourselves again by his Spirit into these events which make us and remake us and make us and remake us. This is what the gift of this week is. This King of love comes to bear our redemption. And so I invite you to take the posture in your heart and your soul like this man. I love this photograph. It's from Kyiv 2 years ago. In the public square. Like these two people are just kind of going about their business. There's a stall over there selling things. But there in Kyiv, there's this man. And his only hope, what he needs to do this day is he needs to just stand and embrace the cross on which Jesus died for him. I invite you to take that posture this week. To see yourselves in all these pictures. And yet, to have hope. Because actually, this story isn't primarily about us. It's about the God who has come for us. Such is his relentless love. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ, King of eternal glory. For by your suffering and death, you have redeemed the world. And we're going to hold some silence, and then I'm going to pray.